All right. This is another video about edit distance, right? We've talked in the past in other links, in other videos that you can see in links above. We've talked about what edit distance means. Quick summary: number of edits versus total number of words equals edit distance. So if you have a sentence with 6 words and you've changed, moved, removed 3 of them, that's an edit distance of 50%, in short, right? But what we are observing is that different languages obviously have different average edit distance. So just to name a few, right? If we talk about English into Spanish, we're seeing more or less 5.5% average edit distance. When we're talking about English into French, we're talking about 12.4% edit distance. And we're talking about, let's say for English, English into Danish, we're seeing 4.5% edit distance. When we're seeing English into Thai, we're seeing 11.8% edit distance, right? So these are just average edit distances for that specific language pair over, and these were measured over 50 million words, done in dozens of domains and languages. So this was a report that we've published a few months ago, and that's where I'm getting this data from. But the quirky thing, or the interesting part for me, is that whereas the edit distances on average seem to be fairly close, right? You're seeing maybe some languages operating at 5%, some languages operating at 15%, but you're already within a range that kind of makes sense, right? You're thinking about machine translation, large language models are getting better. You're seeing fewer and fewer edits. That's happening. But when you take a look at individual user behavior, it gets pretty fascinating, because then you notice that there are people all over the place. There are translators who are, for that given language pair, so maybe English into Spanish, for instance, as an example, are changing 1% or less of that content. So they're changing nearly 1/5, right? They're changing 1/5. So they're basically doing 80% less changes than others. And then you have other translators who are translating 77% of that content, which is nearly more than 13 times more, right, than the average. And what explains that, right? In my opinion, what most explains that, sure, you have obviously the language itself plays a role, the language combination, the content type obviously plays a role. Whether it's marketing or support, you're going to see different kinds of edit distances. But what we notice is that user behavior is kind of independent of these things. So you have users who are changing less than 1%, which means they're basically just reading things and confirming things. And without factoring edit time and quality, we don't know exactly whether this 1% just means that the translations they're receiving are extraordinarily good. We don't know if they're producing extraordinarily crappy translations just because they're confirming everything. But again, that's a hypothesis that needs to be tested, right? Is it 1% because the translation feed quality is so good? Is it 1% because the translation edit quality is so bad, right? Interesting question around data. Then when we talk about 77% changes, does that mean that they're just ignoring the feed and rewriting them entirely for the most part? Or does it mean that the feed quality is very bad? And does rewriting the feed actually make the language quality better, right? And the challenge that we face is that for me as a translator, for instance, I want to feel like the material that I'm writing is my own. I want to feel like I'm the author. And at the same time, I need to, from an economic perspective, from a productivity perspective, I need to be able to move quickly. So the only way I can move quickly is by making the fewest number of edits possible. The more edits, naturally, the more time, the more probability I have of introducing mistakes. So we're talking about this delicate balance where fewer edits are better, too few edits are bad, too many edits are also bad. When we're talking about post-AI editing, it's about finding that sweet spot where you're making just the right number of edits, not just the number, but the right kinds of edits. So maybe, you're changing, the sentence says something about, our platform, and you change that to our system. Maybe it's synonymous, and maybe that change isn't really relevant. But maybe, let's say, it's the name of a term, like somehow context-sensitive translate. Our concept got translated. Now it doesn't make sense in Spanish, should have been kept as a proper noun, should have been kept in English. That's an important edit. And it's not just an important edit because it's going to increase understanding over what we're doing. It's an important edit because in the context of teaching an engine, it's going to remind the engine every single time that that concept shouldn't be translated. So it's super interesting that it's very difficult to correlate the number of edits with quality, both too many and too few. And it's also very interesting to see that there's such a discrepancy as far as user behaviors, users that are completely diving in headfirst to this AI editing thing and really perhaps even being negligent about it. And then you also see users who are really, in some sense, almost fighting it or denying it and really putting in the full effort to rewrite most sentences. And the other thing that's interesting is that, again, this user behavior, at least based on our studies, they can't be directly correlated to the actual language. So it's not that, let's say, the user who's changing 77% is changing 77% because they're working on a specific content type or specific language that requires those edits. They're changing those because that's their style, right? And the challenge that I see moving forward is that for translators that are translating that are changing that much, right? Either they're sure that they're working on content that really not only requires that, but welcomes that. So maybe they're rewriting completely a marketing campaign and it makes sense for them to do that. But if they're doing those number of edits to, for instance, content that doesn't require that, maybe it's support material, maybe it's a paper, maybe it's something that doesn't require that, then they're becoming unproductive and they're becoming inefficient. And either they're going to be outpriced or they're going to become just obsolete from a translation productivity perspective. So that's the challenge that I see right now for us, is figuring out what good looks like from a user behavior perspective in terms of edit distance. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like and subscribe if you liked this content.